Hey everybody, Merry Christmas. This is going to be our last episode before the holiday season. We're going to take a little bit of a break for Christmas, but we're going to be jumping on here talking about traditional values on the traditional press. No way would I miss out on a nice, beautiful, happy, healthy, wholesome Christmas episode. Thanks everybody for jumping on here. Love having all of you. We are going to talk about the Trinity today because the Christian Trinity is going to give us this incredible insight into the relational universe in which we live. This is not some stoic place that we live in where you don't need to be related to anything in order to be happy, healthy, wholesome within yourself. This is a universe in which you can only make sense of anything in terms of relationships with someone else or with something else. You cannot know what, for example, wood is unless you have touched a piece of wood, unless you have come into a relational contact with that particular thing. Unless you have experienced wood, you can't know what wood is. You can't know what social life is until you have experienced a conversation with someone that you don't like. You can't know who you are unless you look at yourself from the light of your relationships with other people, with other things, with your pets, with your car. You can't know who you are unless you know who you are in relationship to the universe extant and especially to that universe of persons in which you orbit. And your particular little solar system is the most important part of your life. It's more important even than whatever's going on in this crazy little mind of ours. The universe is a relational place. Nothing can be understood unless it is understood in relationship to someone else or to something else. There is not one single scientific experiment that can be done in isolation. There is nothing that you can measure unless you are measuring it against something else. For example, you can't know how long a millimeter is unless you can measure a millimeter against something else that has a particular place of existence, of knowing, of experience within yourself. So, for example, you can't measure a millimeter unless you have an idea of how big things are in your mind. So, a pencil lead, for example, we maybe are going to buy a 2 millimeter pencil lead. Well, we can understand what that means because we have seen things that size. We have seen pencil leads that size. We have seen something that triggers within us in our experiential relational existence. We cannot go beyond that and come up with something in a vacuum. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Even space doesn't exist in a vacuum. The totality of space is its own thing. And vacuums can exist, but a vacuum only matters because it's in relationship to something else, and it can only be studied in relationships to something else. Every single thing that we do is a relationship. Every single thing that we attempt to accomplish can only be accomplished in a relational understanding. So even if you're trying to accomplish something within yourself, the only reason why you know that needs to be accomplished is because of your relationships to other people. So for example, you want to start getting up in the mornings better. Why? This is something that you want to accomplish by yourself, for yourself. You can't do it without a relationship with your bed, without your relationship with your smartphone, without a relationship with your work, without a relationship with the gym, without a relationship with the other people in your life. You cannot do anything without a relationship. There's nothing that you can understand without a relationship. Everything is about relationships, which is why throughout all of human history, mankind has come up with what they have considered to be the best system for understanding a relational universe to make sense of said universe. And that's where the gods come into play. So in a polytheistic world, the whole idea of the gods is extraordinarily logical from a relational standpoint. A lot of times in the modern world, we tend to think of the gods as this backwards, insane idea that, ancient cultures had, that nobody would ever believe in something nuts like that. Well, I'm here to tell you that is not true. Those that came up with the polytheistic ideas were very intelligent, and they did it for a very good reason. And polytheism is making a comeback. And I'll give you an example. The author of the Dilbert comics is on Twitter regularly talking about a simulation theory. And what simulation theory is this idea. I'm going to move this microphone a little bit closer to me. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me a little bit better now. But the idea of a simulation theory has been popularized by the Matrix movies, where we all live in this simulation, and some AI, some group of people is running this simulation. And the author of the Dilbert comics recently, his son died from overdosing on fentanyl. And he is very bitter, very angry. He's trying to make sense of the universe. And he now believes in a simulation theory universe. And what a simulation theory universe basically is, think, the Matrix, really. Some AI running this machine in which all of human consciousness is inputted, and we all experience each other based upon this, based upon the AI. Some people could be total simulations in order to further the simulation, and the Matrix did an excellent job of explaining simulation theory. You guys have all seen The Matrix. You know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen The Matrix, you need to. It's a cultural masterpiece. The fellow here that we're talking about, who created the Dilbert comics, now has basically started, believing this theory. He's been talking about, he's, very disappointed about the way that the world is working. He's like, it's got to be a simulation. It makes a lot of sense. You can hear about simulation theory a lot on the Joe Rogan Experience. This is actually becoming a more and more popular ideology. And this individual posted a message the other day. He said that he was having a lot of leg pain, a lot of back pain. And he lifted up his eyes to the heavens and asked the authors of the simulation if they wouldn't mind just turning down the pain a little bit. Or better yet, could they just turn off the pain? Wouldn't, just turn off the pain a little bit for right now. And he said he woke up the next day and the pain was gone. And this idea of a world that is more real than our world is the Platonic understanding of the cave, in Plato's analogy of the cave. This idea that mankind lives in a less real universe, and he can only experience the real universe as shadows on the wall, and he makes up these ideas about what the real universe looks like from the shadows on the wall. And if somebody were even able to go and cross that great divide and go experience the real universe, if they were to come back, their views would be incompatible with the people who were living in the cave. And simulation theory now is very popular. It's becoming more and more popular all the time. And that means that polytheism is coming back, because the whole idea of simulation theory is that there's a group of people, or a group of machines, or a group of some higher entity that is working together on certain portions of the simulation in order to make sure that it operates properly. And the whole idea of a singular God is now out the window. You don't need a singular God because there are operators inside of the or outside of the simulation, which are directly engaged inside of the simulation and who are running things on Earth or in this material universe, which is why a lot of things that are happening that don't seem to make sense are the way they are. Why are planets so far away from each other? Why can't we just, do these things? Why is there pain? All these other different issues that don't seem to make sense to these people that believe in simulation theory, because they're attempting to come up with a logical explanation for human experience. And a polytheistic world is not an illogical one. A polytheistic world is one where we as those, we as humans who are experiencing reality, harsh reality, painful reality, are seeing, okay, well, there's all these relationships. Doesn't it make sense for those that govern the universe to also have high relationships? Doesn't it make sense for there to be a totality of godship, which, frankly, if, obviously, by definition, by necessity, if there is a group of people that are governing daily lives, that are the rulers, say that, the gods of even the economy, these great massive engines that would make a lot of sense to be a computer program, they would be somehow in relationship not only to themselves in Mount Olympus, but they would also be in relationships to us. So we could communicate with the operators of the simulation. Why wouldn't we be able to do that? If they're watching us, if they're governing our lives, why wouldn't they be able to communicate with us and us with them? And maybe they could get something out of our lives. Think about the amount of benefit that you get as a player with full autonomy in a video game. The amount of influence and the amount of pleasure, the amount of joy that you get out of watching NPCs interact with the world, you would magnify that experience 1,000 times by watching real human beings interact. And the stories that we come up with, the genius, crazy things that we do, the mad, insane plans that we have as human beings, fascinating to watch. Obviously, they're fascinating to watch, or we wouldn't have books and movies and television shows and 1,000 and video games built around our lives, because we're very interesting. We're extraordinarily interesting. Nothing is more interesting than the things that we are doing. It's, we're fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So, relationships. The Trinity. Here I come, bringing it back. So there's different ideas, obviously, about who or what God is, or the gods are, or who's in charge of the moral law, who's running the universe, who is deciding these macro things, who has spun the universe into existence, what happens. We've got our God, the universe is God theory, which is pantheism. We've got our simulation theory now, which is becoming more and more popular all the time, which is polytheism. Then we've got our legacy religions, which are your Christianity, Islam, Judaism, your Judeo-Christian religions. They're going to be your legacy religions, and they are your monotheism. But I really shouldn't include Islam and Judaism and Christianity in the same, because Islam is technically the next level beyond monotheism, which is ferocious monotheism, which is, there's a term for it, which I'm not quite. I either have to coin it or I have to find it, but I'm sure there's a term for it. But it's a ferocious monotheism. It is a all else destroying monotheism where everything is God. And there is a term for that. I can't believe that I can't remember it. Moving on. So there's Islam, which is even a next level. So it's the destruction of all other things, all other wills. There's no free will in Islam. And Islam would be on the next level, but, we'll kind of classify them as monotheism. So, relationships. Why the Trinity is so important, and why the Trinity is so much more logical than polytheism or pantheism. Although pantheism, every single level has logic. There's no system that does not exist without an excellent amount of logic and without a ton of things that have to work together in order for the system to be able to exist. So, Christianity versus pantheism versus polytheism. What is it that specifically separates the form of monotheism in Christianity from polytheism? So there's a major problem with Islam and their ferocious monotheism, and that is the problem of love. So love, if we were to describe it, if we were to have a definition for love, we cannot describe love as a feeling, as an emotion. These are byproducts of love. Love is this impossibly magical force that comes into being almost physically in plenty of instances. But love is the desire for the best in someone else and action on the part of the lover to attempt to help achieve that goal. And love without an object is nothingness. So love has to result in fruit. Without fruit, there is a brokenness to love, which is why a couple that is barren, that is childless, is a tragedy, because these are people that want the fruit of their love to pour out of them and to create fruit. And why it has always been throughout history viewed as a tragedy and not as a blessing. There are couples today, obviously, that have decided, we're not going to have babies because of X, Y, and Z reasons, and they have chosen to be a barren couple, and they have decided that their love has an end. And there are people that say, well, not right now, maybe in a little bit, and that's fine. You can't always just, we're going to have 14,000 babies and we're going to kill our wives in 20 years by having way too many kids. That's insanity. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the idea of love. We're talking, and the difficulty is, if love is to exist, there must be a fruit of that love, which is why we have in the Christian tradition the idea of God the Father, who is defined as love. God is defined as love. God is love. I am love, right? So that love has to have something to love. There has to be an object to love. There has to be something else other than narcissism, which is self-love, which is why there has to be a child of that love. There has to be, logically, or else you have a brokenness in your love. There's something wrong. And that's where God the Son comes from. So God the Son is the only begotten of the Father. And without the Son, you have a brokenness in this relational universe. There's something wrong. If God cannot relate to something else, then God himself cannot be said to truly exist. Because, and this is just pure logic, right? So if we live in a relational universe, if you cannot know yourself without a relationship to something else, which is necessary logically, then God cannot exist without someone to love. And that's why there has to be a Son, logically. It is not possible for God the Father to exist by himself. It is not possible, because a singular entity has nothing to love, and therefore that it has nothing to love and has no way to know even who he is, because he has nothing to compare himself to. If you are the vacuum, you are literally nothingness. But a vacuum inside of a material plane has now properties which can be measured and studied and can be learned about, and the vacuum can learn about itself if it has a spirit. But it cannot do any of those things if there's nothing to bounce off of. And that's why God the Son exists. But it gets even more complicated, because now God the Son has been born, has been begotten of the love of the Father. He's literally the product of love, which is what love does. Love bears fruit. And so now you have God the Father and God the Son. Well, there's something else that's going to happen here now, because now if God the Son exists and he's part of God the Father, he is the seed of God the Father. You can't separate the idea of God the Son from the idea of God the Father. They are one and the same, but they're two persons. They have to be. But if they exist separately but simultaneously and together, they're going to love each other. And the love of one God for another God is so powerful that there must be a unique form of this love that is so real. It is the spirit. It must be the spirit of the love between God the Father and God the Son. So we say, okay, well, this love we call the Spirit of God. Well, it is God, therefore it is holy. And this love, therefore, definitionally, God has to be holy or else he's not God. He's, something else entirely. But if God is holy and God's love for God is holy, then this love is a holy love, and it is this union of loves, which is the Holy Spirit, which is why we call him that. We could say the Holy Father and the Holy Son and the Holy Spirit. They used to call it the Holy Ghost. But this Spirit is fascinating. This is probably the most fascinating part about the Trinity to me, because it has taken a life of its own. The Holy Spirit is a he. He is not a force. It's not an impersonal force anymore. The love of God to God is so real that it has taken life. And so this mutual bond of love, this bouncing back of love back and forth, is so powerful that it develops this spirit. We experience living spirits all the time. We don't think about them as such, but they are real, and we can talk about them in terms of company culture. Company culture is a kosher word that we use to describe the spirit of the company. And the spirit of the company is a very real thing. You can walk into a company anywhere, anytime, and instantly feel the spirit of that company. And if you are receptive and paying attention, you will feel that spirit. You will. And the reason why we know this is because people can literally walk into a company and be like, I don't want to work here. This is nuts. You guys are so unhappy. What is wrong here? This is crazy. And you haven't talked to a single person yet. I'll give you another example. The love between a man and a woman. We call this love magic. We don't understand it. The love between a man and a woman, when they become wed, is described in the Christian tradition as a great mystery, because they become one flesh. They become one entity. But they're two persons existing simultaneously, separately, and yet together. And there's a level of oneness that exists. And if that love is holy and perfect, which is extraordinarily rare for humans, but that love is going to take on a life of its own. And when you literally walk into another room, if there is great love between you, other people feel it. They know that it's there. They can tell. You don't have to be smiling. You don't have to say anything. The instant that you walk into a room, people are like, oh, there's love there. And they get it. This is a universal human experience. If there is love, that love takes on a life of its own. And even just thinking about someone else's love is enough to elevate your own spirit if it's a good spirit of love. If it's bad, it drags you down. it takes on a life of its own, and it can affect and influence people thousands of years after the lovers are dead. That's amazing. You read about great lovers in history and you get inspired by this love. It makes you feel different. That's incredible. And it's perfectly logical. Because we are not God, we are not capable of having our spirits literally take life like God can, but it becomes more real than most of us are ever going to give it credit for. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about science, because this is absolutely fascinating. And people say that this is a hoax, but it's been replicated. And it's been replicated. But there was a famous bizarre experiment that was attempted by the furniture company IKEA in Dubai, which only Dubai would ever be comfortable doing something like this, but thanks Dubai. What they did was they created a live experiment for school children. They put two identical plants that were in identical conditions in, I believe it was an IKEA store, for 30 days, and the only difference between these two plants was one plant was spoken to negatively, while the other plant was showered with regular compliments. And at the end of the period, there was an extraordinary difference between how the plants looked. One of these plants wilted, and one of the plants flourished. And they did this all day and all night. And I don't know how many times I have heard in my life about people who are real gardeners who talk to plants, but they're actually really common. People talk to plants all the time. King Charles talks to his plants. He made a joke the other day that now he doesn't talk to them anymore. Now he commands them, now that he's king. But gardeners that talk to their plants will swear that their plants do better because they tell them what to do. They tell them to grow. They tell them to be happy, be healthy, grow, be alive. Why? Because we have relationships with our plants. And this study has been replicated now repeatedly. It is becoming more and more and more proven by science that simply loving a plant and showing the plant that you love them and telling the plant that you love it does something magical to that plant, mysterious to that plant, mystical to that plant, spiritual to that plant, and results in physical change, actual physical change. You can replicate this study at home. I dare you. Put two plants next to each other. Tell the one plant how much you hate it every day, multiple times a day. Put a little speaker next to it. Put two speakers next to these plants if you really want to do it. Have the one plant play on repeat how much you hate it. And tell the other plant how much you love this plant and you want it to flourish and bear fruit and be happy. I'll be fascinated if you do that. It would be amazing. I would love to know. In fact, I'm actually going to do this experiment probably someday because it's fascinating to think about. Anybody can do this. You can see how much love affects. I mean, you don't have to be told that if you tell one kid how much you love that kid every day and you tell the other kid how much you hate that kid, the difference between the two growths, the two growth patterns is going to be massive. You don't need to be explained this. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows why. You can feed them the same. You can treat them the same. You can discipline them the same. But if you tell one kid you love him and the other kid you hate him, one of those two children will not turn out well. This is obvious, right? Like, we don't need science to teach us this. We can use our own brains. We can use our own eyes to see this. We know this. It's obvious. So in terms of relational universes and the Trinity, I am literally going to bring everything back to the idea of spirits and the idea of love, because this is Christmas time, and the idea of the Trinity, of the Godhead, and why this is so important. Because let us look at the difference between polytheism and monotheism, Christian monotheism, not ferocious monotheism, which is totally illogical. Because a Muslim monotheism cannot possibly exist because that God, their Allah, cannot know who he is. He can't know anything about himself. He can't know that he's love. He can't know that he's light. He can't know what anything is because he has nothing to love. He has no way to relate to anything. And you say, well, there's nothing that God can relate to. He's God. Can you relate to an NPC? How much superior are you to that NPC? That NPC was a extraordinarily flat 2D character, and yet you feel like you can relate to him or her. And you tell me that God feels like there's nothing that he can relate to? That's extraordinarily small-minded. And it's illogical, because we know that we live in a relational universe. It's impossible for a ferocious monotheism to exist, and even if it did exist, it would then be impossible for Allah, if Allah, the concept of Allah, could possibly exist, to love. And we see this, the reality of this, playing out in the Quran. There is not one mention of love from Allah to anything in the Quran. Literally not one. Allah does all of these things. Allah proves how great he is within the Quran, but Allah never says that he loves anyone. And it makes perfect sense because Allah has nothing that he can relate to. He's a vacuum. He is the vacuum. He is the great nothingness, the great emptiness, the great I am nothing, I am no one, I have nothing to love, I am nothingness. The difference between Christianity, Christian monotheism, and polytheism gets a little bit different, because polytheism is less incompatible with Christianity than ferocious monotheism. Polytheism is the idea that there are gods that order certain portions of the universe. So, for example, the god of the oceans, Poseidon, or Neptune, the god of the sea. What does he govern? He governs sailors. He governs passage through the water. And you can relate to Neptune through your experience with the water. And Neptune relates to the other Olympian gods through his marriages, through his interpersonal connectivity. It makes way more sense. Oh, and you know what? I'm gonna actually mention pantheism just really quick, because pantheism is very similar to ferocious monotheism, to Allahism, if you will. Because pantheism also is an anti-relational concept, because it says that the universe itself is God. Well, the universe is one. Everything within the universe is one. Therefore, the universe could not distinguish between itself because it has nothing to relate to. So one particulate could not tell the difference between another particulate because these particulates are part of the oneness of pantheism, and the oneness of pantheism has nothing outside of itself to be able to relate to. Therefore, everything would get jumbled and confused in a pantheistic universe, and nothing would have any order because it would be the great vacuum, which is the idea that space itself is a great vacuum, is the great vacuum, and everything inside of space would be unable to relate to anything else. Therefore, pantheism also doesn't make any sense from a relational universe standpoint. But pantheism and monotheism and ferocious monotheism, they're basically on the same category of this. And so you have category errors, you have distinction errors. You can't tell what the difference is if you can't relate to something else. So a universe could never create itself because it wouldn't know what to create. Polytheism is totally different, because polytheism says that in the beginning there was the gods, and the gods brought forth the universe into existence. The Lord of the Rings polytheism, if you will, is that the idea that God created the Valar, and the Valar sung the universe into existence. Polytheism makes sense as long as, this is extraordinarily important, as long as the gods, plural, are subject to the great God, the one God, the all-Father. And if all gods are subservient to the all-Father, then polytheism can actually make sense logically. Otherwise, it cannot. There's no way to make sense of polytheism at all, because the difficulty is, if you have a bunch of gods running around with different ideas, and fighting within themselves, then you run into major problems with morality, major problems with relationships, major problems with love specifically, because you cannot have a holy spirit of love betwixt the gods if the gods are capable of evil. And if you read the great philosophers, they will tell you this. And these people come from polytheistic worlds. They're like, this is insane. These ideas that people are saying are, that the gods were doing, they would never do this. They're holy. They're supposed to be good. What do you mean they had extramarital affairs? What are you talking about? Are you crazy? You read, this is fascinating. You read Socrates. Socrates believes in holy gods, but he's polytheistic, 100% polytheistic. Then you read Plato's works, separate from Socrates, and you see that, he's polytheistic, but he talks about God singular a lot. Then you get to Aristotle, the student of Plato, and it's pure monotheism. Pure. None of this polytheistic garbage, because the problem is, if you have perfect personalities, a will like a human being, specifically, if you have wills like human beings, then necessarily your people are going to come into conflict with each other. And conflict doesn't work in a holy pantheon. Conflict destroys the pantheon. It cracks it. It rips the godness of the gods apart. And the gods cannot remain gods and be evil, which is why we talk about fallen angels. So if you were to simply replace the gods with the angels, suddenly the system makes way more sense. And that's why it's so important to have angels. And these angels are named beings with wills that can fall, but they're different than us. They're lesser than humans in the Christian tradition. Angels are operating under subcategories. And if we're going to talk about angels, I'm going to talk about Father Christmas, because it's Christmas time. Everything that we talked about so far, the idea of spirits, the idea of love, the idea of fruit of love, comes into being with the idea of Father Christmas. Let me ask you a question. Do you know of any instances in any story where the introduction of a Christmas chapter did not add to the story, but subtracted from it? I can't think of any. Think about the Harry Potter series. Christmas adds to this story. It doesn't detract from it. Think about the power that Father Christmas adds to Narnia. It doesn't take away from the story. It adds to the story. It blows the story up 1,000 times more powerfully because of the existence of Father Christmas. The idea of Christmas, period, is extraordinarily powerful. Think about the Christmas Carol work. That's probably Charles Dickens' best work. It was one of his shortest works. It's extraordinarily powerful. Think about any story, anywhere, anytime. If you have a Christmas scene, the story's better. Why is Home Alone set during Christmas time? Would Home Alone be nearly as interesting if it wasn't for all the tinsel and bells and Christmas? Of course not. There's something magical about Christmas. So we have to ask why. What is so powerful about Christmas? Why does it influence us? Why is it so attractive? And why do people want to destroy it? And who is trying to destroy it? It is only the unhappy among us that want to destroy Christmas. Is Christmas time stressful? Yeah, it can be. If you let the stress get to you, and if you haven't planned appropriately, and if you blow your budget, yes, Christmas time is extraordinarily stressful. Can you have Christmas without presents? Yes. Think about how the Grinch stole Christmas. The spirit of Christmas was more powerful than the tinsel, than the trees, than the toppers, than the bells, than the golden ornaments around the tree. It was more than the Christmas beast. It was more than the Christmas feast. It was something higher than the physical methods by which we celebrate these magical events, these universal experiences. And it's an issue of love. The great love is the God love, and the God love is manifested in Christmas through the birth of Christ. That is extraordinarily important. The act of the gift of Christ, the act of the giving of the gift of Christ to humanity, is setting the stage for how to demonstrate the love of Christmas and the love of each other. So when you give of yourself to someone else, you are expending your own resources for the best, because you want the best for someone else. You want to give them something of your spirit. And what happens is you connect. You connect with each other when you give them something. If you give a homeless man $1, you connect with him. If you look him in the eyes, you also connect with him. If you look him in the eyes and don't give him something, your spirit's connected, but did they connect in a healthy manner? Do you feel good about yourself? Does he feel good about you? There's something that happens there. Spirits are powerful. There's powerful, powerful things, and they do not get talked about nearly enough in the modern age. And I was going to talk about iconoclasm. I don't know if I have time. There's so many things I need to talk about. I'm going to move on as quick as I possibly can. So this, I just don't have time. I do have time. I can say it quickly. I'm going to show you something. Those of you who are watching. This is an icon. The iconoclasts, I can't resist. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to talk about it. I have to. The iconoclasts said, and people today say, oh, you're worshiping that wood. You're worshiping that paint on that wood. That's ridiculous. You know, you hear from the pulpits of plenty of places all the time things like, you know, if you really love that car has become an idol in your life. If you desperately want that job has become an idol in your life. You need to exorcise that idol from your life. Cast it away. Have no other gods before you. That's not what an idol is at all. You have to think about what an idol actually is. It means that you think that that thing represents God. So if you're thinking about, for example, a statue of Diana. Nobody who carved this statue of Diana out of stone ever thought that the piece of rock was the god. Nobody thought that. You would have to be insane to think that. They thought that it represented God. And that's what icons are supposed to do. They're supposed to represent something beyond themselves. Nobody is worshiping a car. Do you know what worship is? Worship is the author of the Dilbert comics looking up into the sky, praying and asking the authors of the simulation to give him less pain. Nobody has ever done that about a job or a car or money. If you were instead to look up into the universe and pray to the god of luck before going into a casino, that is worship. And if you have a little medallion that you pray to, you're not praying to the medallion of the god of luck, which I don't even know if that's a thing, but let's say it is. You're not praying to the stupid piece of medallion. You're praying through it, piercing through it, connecting with your spirit to what you believe is a spiritual being. And when you do, something happens. That's extraordinarily powerful when you pray through something, through an icon, through a statue, through an idol. Something is happening there, and spirits connect powerfully, far more than you ever think would happen. Bringing it all back to Christmas, I know I can talk about the icon thing. We're going to talk about the icon thing later, but I needed to explain that in order to explain this. I probably didn't even need to, but I had to. When you love each other through Christmas, your spirits connect. And when a ton of people are doing this, it gets more and more and more and more powerful with each person that connects. If a sleigh drives through the street tomorrow with sleigh bells and horses and the people on the back of the sleigh are singing Christmas carols, you connect with those people. And your spirits are elevated. Their spirits are elevated. The Christmas spirit elevates. You put Christmas lights on your house. Your entire neighborhood and you are elevated by the Christmas spirit. Do not think for a second that spirits do not take on a life of their own, because we see that they do. So the idea of Santa Claus is the idea of Father Christmas. If you were to kill Christmas, you could kill the spirit of Christmas. It is theoretically possible. But as long as Christianity exists, you'll never be able to get rid of Christmas unless you kill Christianity. And there are those today that say that they are Christian that want to kill Christmas. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility. We'll never let that happen in this house. As long as the spirit of Christmas is around, Santa Claus is real. Now we say, okay, you just said something absolutely insane. You just told me that Santa Claus is real. Is it really that crazy, though? It's the idea of a person that exists, a being that exists only to further Christmas. Every time you go and buy a Christmas present for someone, every time you put a ribbon on a present, every time you slap a piece of tinsel on a tree, you are furthering the spirit of Christmas. And that spirit takes real life and does things, surprising things. I've given you like 18 examples here today of things that your spirit can do with love to create things that are surprising. Things that aren't necessarily expected. But in the old world, they did expect it. And the reason that they did expect it is because they understood the power of spirit, the power of the mystery, the power of love. And I hope that today, in this landscape of sadness and tyranny that we see everywhere, that we can forget about that for a little while, that we can go out, that we can celebrate Christmas together, and that together we can bring the spirit of Christmas into fullness of life, and that through that act, we can connect to each other on a powerful, meaningful, life-changing level. And with that, Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy New Year. Can't wait to see you all in 2023.
This has been the Traditional Press Podcast. Thank you for listening, and tune in next time for more traditional ideas and exploration of the why behind the what.